Hello, 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 and welcome to a brand new Social Confoes episode. It's time for a brand new episode, Diego, and we have our first comment already. Gregory was getting worried. Where are you guys? Well, we're right here, right on time at 9 o'clock. And yes, Gregory, I gave Diego a scare today for making him think that I wouldn't show up for today's episode. But I'm really excited about today's guest, so I wouldn't miss it for the world.
Yeah, I'm getting used to it, so these jump scares don't phase me anymore. But yeah, today's gonna be an exciting one. We have our guest is currently based in Chicago, and as you've seen in the announcement, we have Pek Pongpaet, the founder and CEO of Impekable, a UX design firm based in the US, and they serve clients globally. And I gotta say, when I checked it out, I was blown away by the portfolio, the work they've done. If you ask me now, if I knew beforehand what everything was that Tech has done, I would have been intimidated to ask him. But I'm glad it happened the other way around. We'll go into that a bit. But yeah, he also has two podcasts. So just like us, he hosts his own podcast, the What is UX podcast and Founders with Tech podcast. So if you guys get a chance after this episode, also check those out. And fun fact, I think I'm going to ask him to tell us more about this himself. But I'm going to bring Peck up right now. Hey, Peck, welcome to Social Convos.
Hey, thank you. Nice to meet you. Greg, thanks for hopping on the show. Yeah.
Yeah. And quickly, the first time I met Peck was in a Zoom call, and we were all introducing ourselves. And this is the funnest fact I've heard anyone just, casually say, yeah, I used to, Mortal Kombat, Sub-Zero, the motion capture. Yeah, I used to do that. So, Peck, can you tell us a bit more about that, on your history with Mortal Kombat and motion capture and in the DC universe as well?
Yeah. So there's a video game that was big in the early 90s called Mortal Kombat. It started out as an arcade game. And over the years, it's, I don't know how many years it's been, but it's been, at least 2 decades since Mortal Kombat's been around. And there's recently a movie, Mortal Kombat movie, but I've been was involved in doing the martial arts moves for Mortal Kombat, starting with Mortal Kombat 5 till about Mortal Kombat 10 for 10 years. They did about a game every 2 years. And that was like over 10 years ago. I'm sort of older now and I don't do that anymore. But yeah, I did that for 10 years. Mortal Kombat, it was like the first game was, I think, 2001, I want to say. Yeah, 2001 to 2011, right? So Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance, Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks, Armageddon. I forget. Yeah, there was MK versus DC Universe. Oh, Shaolin Monks, and maybe a Deception. I forgot Deception, and then the reboot called Mortal Kombat.
That's quite a lot. Yeah, I think Mortal Kombat, if you ask anyone around our generation, they grew up with Mortal Kombat. I myself have played it. I have a few friends who, so it's kind of
Yes,
really cool to have someone here who was behind the scenes and can maybe shed some lights how that was.
Yeah. Well, the cooler fact, like, the games that I'm in were not as famous as the original games, right? Mortal Kombat 1, 2, and 3. Right, Mortal Kombat 2 is probably in the arcades is one of the best, games, and 3. The more cool fact is some of my instructors were in those games. So like Johnny Cage was my instructor. The guy who played is a real martial artist named Danny Pacina, and then the guy who played Kung Lao was also a real martial artist. Who they both come from the same lineage of martial arts and same martial arts instructor, but he also has his own school, and his name is Tony Marquez. And for both of them, I actually studied with both of them, so I knew those people who played those characters. And Tony Marquez actually also played a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle in one of the movies, or maybe two of the movies, 2 and 3. Yeah, the stunt
Okay,
performer.
so our audience is fishing already. So there are a couple of questions. Of course, a shout out from Gregory once again, but he wants to know what's your martial arts background, and also, um, is there any significance of the Mario poster behind you?
Yeah, so the style that I did was it's called wushu, which is a Chinese martial arts. I was growing up, I grew up watching a lot of kung fu movies and kung fu like soap opera, Chinese soap opera in Thailand where I grew up. And of course, I saw Jet Li, Jackie Chan, um, and I was very, I always wanted to study martial arts, but being of very strict Asian parents, they were just like, just study, just don't do anything else, just study, just get good grades, and follow that very narrow path. So so it's always something in the back of my mind, but not something my parents encouraged or were going to support. So I how I started was when I graduated college with an engineering degree, got my job, my first paycheck. I started looking for a kung fu school near my house. And as luck would have it, Daniel Pacina, who played Johnny Cage in the original Mortal Kombat video games, was teaching out of a school that happened to be close to where I live. And I just happened to pick a school that was close so that I could go because of traffic and convenience. If I didn't, if it was far away, then I probably wouldn't go. And he happened to be teaching at that school, so I got very lucky to study there. The significance of Mario, it's not a poster. It's actually an art piece made out of wooden blocks. And it's supposed to be a sound diffuser. So when you have, say, a podcast or something, they have those really ugly foam diffusers that I bought. And I was like, oh, this is so ugly. I would never put this up. And then I've heard about these wooden blocks that are, I found them on Etsy that were sound diffusers. And some of them are just bland, boring blocks. And some of them have like some paint on them. And I was like, I looked at it and like, yeah, this is kind of cool, but not what I want. And then I was like, oh, this is like, they're like pixels. They could be like pixel art. So I actually commissioned someone on Etsy to make this special for me.
That's really cool. We should get some,
That's
man.
cool.
I have no sound diffusers as of
I have
this new
white
corner.
walls.
Yeah, if you
White
just have
walls
like
all around me.
straight, like flat walls, right, without anything kind of breaking the sound. I've listened to my own podcast, and I can tell that it sounds like tinny or echoey. Yeah.
Yeah, I've noticed that a few times as well. So it was kind of like more of a right place, right time for you. That's how you got kind of roped into the scene, from what I'm understanding.
Yeah, well, I got lucky to be met up with good coaches. I mean, like the Mortal Kombat thing, I mean, it is cool to be part of video game history, but my passion for martial arts was, because of like the Jet Li's, Jackie Chan's of the world. And I really enjoyed it's the Mortal Kombat piece, although, it was very small, I studied it for over 10 years. The motion capture work didn't take a lot of time. So every year it would only take up a few days, whenever we did it. They try to cram it in, and I go there, and it was, they have a huge move list. They have like a loose plot for the cinematic trailer or intro, like who fights who and who's supposed to win. And then we martial artists figure out the details of the fight. But it's really only a few days a year versus, the training competition stuff is that was a good chunk of my life after work. Yeah.
Okay. Quick transition to business.
Sure.
How hard was it for you to come up with a name for your company?
Well, the
Was it
lame,
easy, or was it actually more difficult than we would have to imagine?
I had a really lame name for the original company name, and which I won't even share because I'm so embarrassed. But the Impekable one is an early client came up with for me. She had an idea and she brought it up, and I was like, wow, that's a lot of pressure. Impeccable, that means flawless, right? Like that's aiming super high, and that's a lot of pressure to put. And then plus it's got my name in it, and that's kind of vain. So I didn't really like it at first, but then I would test it out. I asked all the other clients. I said, "Hey, I'm thinking about changing the name of the company. So you know the name of the company. How about this new one, Impeccable?" I was like, "Oh, Impeccable, so much better, so much better." It's like, and after hearing that many times, I'm like, okay, fine. I just gave in and leaned in. But it is a good name. And I even people who know me know that I like puns, so this is a great pun.
No, yeah, it's amazing, and it's like it rolls so easily, and it's quite memorable. And the coincidence that it really fits with you, with your name, that's even better. And I love puns as well. But yeah, you mentioned, grew up in Thailand, had the traditional upbringing. We've heard this time and time again, traditional upbringing, do the engineering, economics, and the basic doctor
Doctor,
study,
lawyer.
doctor, lawyer. Yeah, we've heard this time and time again. But you ended up in one of the most creative spaces in tech, especially. So how did you finally make that transition from the traditional trajectory to having a serious hobby in motion capture, and then starting your design UX UI business?
Yeah. So in I discovered my passion. I at some point, maybe like junior high or high school, I got to like learn about computers, and we didn't. My first computer, of course, I think was interaction was at school, but then I would after school I would go to my dad's office, and I borrowed, I had copies of games from friends. So like Prince of Persia, like the old Prince of Persia, and all these other old games. I would play them and had a lot of fun. And, I discovered that I like computers, or at least playing computer games. That's not saying that, I guess I didn't really think too much about it. It's like, oh, I like playing computer games, therefore I must like computers. But I would also tinker with the computers, and learn basic commands and learn DOS. That was in the age of DOS, and learn programs and how to execute programs, copy programs, and learn basic DOS stuff. I enjoyed it. I tinkered with enough of it that I went, and we also had an introductory computer programming course in high school, which I enjoyed. So after that, I decided that I really wanted to study, computers. I didn't realize I went into computer engineering, which is sort of like computer hardware plus computer software. I actually didn't like the hardware part at all. I don't like circuits and capacitors and circuit diagrams and all thermodynamics and all that stuff didn't interest me at all. Like, I think if I could do it back over again, I'd probably just be a pure computer science major and just study software, because hardware had no interest for me. But
I
actually,
can relate.
yeah. But my parents really did want me, or at least my father did want me to be a doctor. And at the time in Thailand, I don't know if it's kind of still true now, but in Thailand, if you want to go into medicine, they have this thing where you have to be an intern, like be sort of an apprentice or intern program, and try it out before dedicating your life, into this field. And when you apply, they assign you to a random hospital. And so when I applied, was going into medicine, I had to go, and I was assigned this sort of like on the edge of Bangkok, like not like a downtown in the city hospital. So it was kind of like more slightly rural. And I worked in the emergency room, and I can tell you, I lasted 2 days. Like, one of the first day, a guy came with an infection the size of a tennis ball, and they had to like cut it open, and it smelled up the whole room, and it just shot up in pus, And then another day, or maybe it was the same day, but a guy, he had a bullet wound, but he didn't come right away. It was he had gotten shot in the leg, and it was infected. It had been either several days or whatnot, but it also he didn't report it right away. So he came in because it was infected, and we had to deal with that as well. So after days of experiences like that, I went back to Dad and I said, "Look, medicine is just not for me. I like there was just like too much blood and you know blood and smell and stuff like that. I was like, I can't do this." My cousin had a very different experience. So when he did the same thing, he was assigned to like pediatrics. So he got to like coddle babies for his internship. So of course he went into medicine, and now he's a great doctor. But
Wait,
my
so
experience was so traumatic, like right away, that I was like, this is too much. I can't
But
do this.
it was probably a little bit like you weren't supposed to get into the field of medicine, so it was kind of meant to be that you have to have that experience.
Yeah, it
Anil
totally
makes a
scared me off. So I told Dad, like, look, medicine, I just can't do it. And like I'm just gonna study computer engineering. So that's what happened.
so
There
for
was no
clarity,
sending me back to that.
the assignment to the hospitals was like random for everyone who like applied.
Yeah, you don't get to choose.
That's
Yeah,
ridiculous.
yeah,
Wow.
you don't get to
So it's
choose.
basically a lottery ticket. Like, okay, you either have a great experience or a horrible experience.
Yeah, and I didn't pass the test, so
Wow.
Um, so how I got into that, that's basically how I got into the field of engineering. And then again, I always grew up watching kung fu movies, so I always wanted to, do martial arts at some point, but I didn't get the support of my parents. So when I finally could get it, with my own money, I did. So that's kind of the story of how I get into tech through school, and then how I got into kung fu or wushu. Yeah.
But you basically grew up like your whole childhood in Thailand, basically, and did your school there. So,
No, not entirely, but we can get into that.
yeah, when was the move to the US actually, and
Yeah.
like, and you decided, to stay in the US, not go back and develop yourself and your business and basically your
Yeah.
career in the US.
So my parents were Thai diplomats. So we grew up traveling around the world. So both my mom was a diplomat, my father was a diplomat. When they had me, they were still also both working, and I grew up the first few years just with my mom in Malaysia. So we ended up in Malaysia, just my mom and I, and then my dad at the time was as a Thai diplomat in Beijing. And actually, that's how I got my name, Pek. So like the old name Beijing is Peking. So PEK is the international airport code. So yeah, that's what Pek
ah,
comes from.
okay.
But yeah, at some point, both my parents traveled for work, and we kind of as kids, grew up traveling like diplomat kids or military kids. But my dad always put us in, both my sister and I, in like American schools or international schools. So it was I didn't really grow up like with a very Thai mindset. So it was always like, at some point I was going to go to the US for college. And yeah, like I'm not very Thai, I guess, in that sense. So yeah. And then as luck would have it, my father, around the time I became like just about graduating high school, my father got assigned to the U.S., to Chicago, as consul general. So he got to move to Chicago and brought us along with, and that was right at the time when I started college. So I started college, so I applied to a few universities, and I got into the University of Illinois, which is in Chicago, and my sister was still in high school, and that's how we ended up in Chicago. And then fast forward a few years, I'm after about a decade or so in working in tech in Chicago, I decided to move to the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, Silicon Valley, because that's where my heart is like tech startups. And I love reading about that. And the tech scene in Chicago in the early 2000s was pretty lame. So we, other than a few, companies. So I decided to move there, and then that's how Impekable started.
Cool. We got some quick comments here, like blood from Anil. Blood in games is different, so that doesn't bother you at all. Yeah,
Well,
especially in
the
Mortal Kombat, because
well,
the
the
gore
funny
in
thing
Mortal
is,
Kombat.
the funny thing is, I liked fighting games, but I didn't really like the game Mortal Kombat as much. I felt like it was like needlessly violent. But I did play games like, I liked, one of my favorite games was Virtua Fighter. Two was one of the best. Tekken, Virtua Fighter, and Tekken and Soul Calibur were my go-to fighting games.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Tekken was
I've
big
had my,
here as well.
yeah, I've had my share
Well,
of Tekken.
where Mortal Kombat was big. There was one more fighting game, Street Fighter, I think.
Street
That
Fighter.
was
Street
pretty big.
Fighter. Yeah.
I played the first one. I didn't get into the
Yeah.
second one so much. For whatever reason, just didn't get into the second one. Like most people, I think it's one of definitely, if not the top fighting game, right? Played all time, Street Fighter 2. But for whatever reason, I just didn't care for it.
And I just quickly thought of this. So quick fun fact here, since Anil mentioned this comment. In a way, because you used to work for Accenture as well, right?
Yeah.
In your early days. So we had Anil here a few months ago, and that's where he started as well. They won't call Accenture, but he started in the Netherlands. So in a way, you guys were maybe colleagues.
Yeah,
So I just made that link.
Yeah,
But
I was at Accenture in Chicago for almost 5 years. Yeah, it's my second or third job.
But that doesn't really explain yet, or so tech, more engineering, computer science background, because UI UX is really more visual. So that transition from the code tech software to the more front end visual side, when did that happen? When,
Sure.
'cause
Yeah.
the products that you guys made were like visually like wow, amazing.
Well, right after college, graduated as software engineer. So the first years were pure software engineering, so writing code. I think for about 7 years, I was mostly a software engineer, software developer, with like especially Microsoft one. So I had all these Microsoft technology certifications. So like Microsoft Solution Developer, Microsoft DBA, all that stuff. I was very into the Microsoft enterprise world. But around towards the end of that, I think when Steve Jobs came back to Apple, and then you saw this like surge of well-designed consumer software, and then like the Facebooks and the Googles and the PayPals and the eBays kind of started coming up, and software like was good, right? Like had a great user interface, was well designed, it was usable. I decided, like at some point everybody writes good code and it's like diminishing returns. Like that's table stakes, right? Where you can have a differentiator. I at least in the consumer space, right, or prosumer, good software is not just good code. It's also well designed. And I really appreciated that. And I was like, oh, that's where I want to be. I want to make, I really enjoyed using good software. I want to be part of that side, that part of that camp. So I started studying self-teaching software design, and eventually became pretty decent at it. But that's how it started, was seeing all that proliferation of internet consumer software, Apple's kind of coming into the field with Steve Jobs and Johnny Ive, and later on the iPhone. Yeah, that's really what got me into software design, UX design. You're muted, Diego. I think you're muted.
Thanks for that. Yeah, no, I said that's really cool, and that quickly brings me to the next question, because you are inspired by Steve Jobs, the UI, that tech internet space. So how much do you think does the environment like Silicon Valley, San Francisco, the Bay Area, that shape someone or help shape you if you look back from growing up in Thailand, moving to Chicago, and then to being exposed in that environment? Do you think it would have ended up a different way if you weren't like in that environment at that time?
Yeah, I think my choice in career would have been very different. I think so. Yeah, I think for me, had I not gone to Chicago, and Chicago's proximity. So while I was in college, so at U of I, the other campus, U of I, this was like the days of Netscape or Mosaic, the first browser, Mosaic, and then right after that,
So
Netscape.
that's 95, around mid
Yeah.
90s.
This was all happening while I was in college taking computer classes. Like all of a sudden, hey, we have this thing called a web browser, Mosaic, from the other campus, U of I, the other campus. Check it out. We download it, use it, like this is cool. And then a couple months later, like Mosaic is no longer cool, and there's this thing Netscape, and we're using that, and then we're using that to browse Yahoo, and we're using that to browse all of a sudden, there's like Hotmail, there's like Google and stuff like that, all while we're in college, and all that was happening. If you were not as close to it while it was happening, you might not have been exposed to it for many other years, right? So I think that proximity helped me kind of be exposed to it at an early time when all those things were happening. Recounting somebody else's interview that I interviewed. She was YouTube's first designer. She went to U of I, the other campus, where she had met Steve Chen and Chad Hurley, the founders of YouTube. They were working on it as a side project, as an evening project, as a cool thing. So being close to all those things helped me get exposed to it early on, which I don't think would have happened had I stayed in Thailand. And also like, even now, right? Like if you look at the startups in Thailand or any other place, it's very different, right? Like they're for example, I think in Thailand, startups tend to be more, there's like tourism tech, or there's agri-tech, agricultural technology. There's like stuff here and there, but also like probably very similar to Suriname, right? The scale is very different because the population is different. It's much smaller, right? If you have, even if you like, there's like a Yelp clone in Thailand, right? And even if you have 50% of the population using it, that's still not that big a number, right? Like, I don't know, I don't remember the population in Thailand, but I do know that, like that app probably has like 50%, but 50% is still a pretty small number compared to like an app that's popular in the US. Yeah. So the scales are very different.
I think in the US, China, for instance, as well. But I think our population is even much smaller than Thailand. So just imagine
Yeah, so
how
I quickly
difficult
checked
that's
it out. The population of
yeah.
Thailand is about 70 million, and
Right.
we aren't even near a million.
Yeah.
So
Well, like, yeah.
Yeah.
Like there's a Yelp clone kind of called Wong Nai, which it means inner circle, but like I think there's like 30 million users, right? Like 30 million users is decent, but when you're talking about Facebook scale, Instagram scale, WhatsApp scale, we're talking about 100 million users or billion users, and yeah.
Okay, I do have a couple of quick fire questions before we head off to the more serious stuff. Diego, what do you think?
yeah, knock yourself out.
So the first question I have to ask, what was your first personal email address?
Personal. Well, yeah, the first email address was the school email address. First personal one was, I want to say it's either a Hotmail. It's like Pek Pongpaet at Hotmail. First initial, last name at Hotmail. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. I
started with
think my
Hotmail as well with
I
some
started with
weird
Hotmail as
ass
well.
name.
Yeah. I mean, technically,
Yeah.
I had an
Yeah. I started
AOL
with
and an
Hotmail as well.
yeah, I had technically I had an ICQ and an AOL email, but I never checked their email. I just used the AOL Instant Messenger, right? Like I used it for the chat, and ICQ I also used it for the chat. I didn't use their email in any way. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the same. I don't even remember that ICQ had an email as well. I only remember ICQ.
Right, right.
Okay.
There's an
So
email. Was there
yeah,
an email? I don't know, but you created an account
yeah.
somehow, right? Yeah.
So are you
Okay.
more like a Mac or Windows user?
It's funny. I've come full circle. In the beginning, I was a Windows user, and then during Apple's time and when I became fully became a designer, I was a Mac user, and I up until recently was a Mac user for a very long time. But now, if you think about other than a few desktop apps, most of your apps are in the browser, right? And I had bought. I travel for work a lot, like as a traveling businessman, traveling salesman, and I had a MacBook Pro, like 15-inch or something. At some point, I got like, man, I'm tired of lugging this thing around. It's heavy. So then I got a MacBook Air, and that thing is lighter, but it's so underpowered. And then now COVID's happened, and I have this MacBook Air, and it's like this huffing and puffing thing that like gets out of breath, right? Like the fan is always on blaring because it's too underpowered, like to have Zoom and my work stuff on and all these Slack and all this stuff. But I'm not moving anywhere, right? And I need a big monitor, so I switched to a desktop PC with like a 49-inch monitor, and it was like with a NVIDIA graphics card. And right now the CPU is at 5%. There's nothing going on. It's not even breaking a sweat.
Oh,
So
you're so confronting me right now. You're
I was
so
about to call you
because
out, Look.
yeah, you're really confronting me because I'm on a MacBook Air now. And for those who have been very sharp, have seen that I switched around and I changed browsers during the show because one of the browser that I originally planned on using wasn't just with the internet connection, it wasn't cutting it. The feed kept disappearing. So I
yeah,
completely
the
understand.
CPU is
But
always like 100%, right? And the fan is like ridiculously high. Here, that problem is gone. Like with I went overboard, right? I also thought I was gonna start gaming, but I really haven't at all. But I bought like a one of those NVIDIA 3090 whatever RTX, thinking I was gonna game, but I don't.
somebody did point out, did you say 49-inch monitor?
Yeah. Like I have a 49-inch curved monitor, so it feels like 3 monitors. It's great. Yeah.
So basically, that's also part of the extra light for the setup.
Yeah.
Okay, so next question would be, what would you consider the first networking website?
Networking website. Like
Could you define networking?
yeah. Define
So
networking.
the first website that you could go on, get a membership, and connect with others around the world.
Yeah. There was High Five before Friendster. I don't think I joined High Five. I used Friendster. Friendster and then MySpace. Funny story is, I met a girl on Friendster. She was my girlfriend for a while. And then I met my wife on MySpace. Yeah.
Oh, that's pretty cool, actually.
But they weren't dating
Yeah.
sites, right? They were just
No.
networking and they're like friends. Yeah. One of my old girlfriends, she was a friend of a friend. And that's how we met through Friendster. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I think in High Five was pretty big in Suriname as well. And you had Hives, which was connected to the Netherlands. So it was either one of those two. And I think Facebook really became popular in Suriname around late 2000s.
2010, around 2010. I
Yeah.
remember that. That's when I got into it as well. Uh,
I
and
liked,
that
like MySpace was getting like people were installing crazy scripts that would just kill your browser, like all these slideshows and like 3 MP3s playing and 10 slideshows, and it was just like slowing down your computer. And then Facebook came and it was like this clean, no nonsense, just the content. And then the feed was actually useful because you didn't have to go to everybody's page to see what they updated, right? Like if you had like 10 friends, like MySpace didn't have a notion of a feed, right? So you had to go to their page to see what happened, what they wrote.
Speaking of a clean space, you just mentioned Facebook. What is your opinion on Facebook's latest UI and user experience? What they changed it to? Like,
I think I don't have a problem with the cleanliness. I think my bigger problem is you have all these designers designing on really big monitors and everything is huge. I'd rather see more information. Like I'm more of an information dense guy. Like I can tell when like maybe young designers have a problem with this. Like they'll design, sometimes it's like they design some stuff that's like ridiculous. Either it can go two ways. Either like when they're designing on a mobile app where they don't test on their phone, they design on a big monitor and it looks okay. And then when they put it on the phone, it looks really small because they don't really test on the phone. So that's one problem. And then the other problem is, they design something that, on another monitor is just the lower resolution monitor. It's just huge because it's designed on a very high res monitor. And I think part of the problem is like the design, UX design. Like I see a lot less content. Like if I were to go to Facebook right now, maybe I also see one post or one and a quarter versus like more. I'd rather have more information density. Yeah.
That's a very, very interesting point. And people have pointed out, which is a reason why Reddit works so well as well, that it's kind of very basic, but it gives the people what you need. And I think like for most of our weekly viewers, they are very familiar with user interface and user experience. But for a noob, for somebody who's brand new, is listening or seeing this for the first time and is like, okay, but why is UI and UX, why is it important? Could you give people like a short, I wouldn't say UI and UX for dummies, but why is that so important for a website or an app when people start using it?
Yeah. Well, there's I guess a good analogy is like when something is well designed, you just enjoy using it more. Or it's easier to use, and I'm not talking about engineering. If something doesn't work, like, hey, the video doesn't work, that's like a good engineering problem. But, I'll contrast like maybe like Google Hangouts versus Zoom. I have actually like two cameras that I switch between. And with Zoom, to change for both of them, sometimes they always by default pick the wrong one, but it takes like 6 clicks through Google to switch cameras. Whereas with Zoom, it's already just a drop down from the camera, the video like stop cam or show cam button. There's like by default, there's a drop down and you just pick one and then that's it. So you drop down and you select it. So it's 2 clicks. Whereas with Hangouts, it's like you have to go into the ... go into the click settings, pick video, click the drop down, select the right one, click OK, click close. I just named at least 6 clicks to get, so that is a much, full of friction. And it's like just changing that setting is so painful to me that it's like, and maybe that's a conscious decision. Maybe like their data says that, hey, 99% of the people who use Hangouts only have one camera. So we're going to just bury this. Right? Because 99% of the people won't have this problem. But for the people who have 2 cameras or more, and and by default these apps pick the wrong camera, then it's a real problem. Like today, we had this problem with StreamYard where by default it picked the wrong mic, and we were trying to figure out, and it was like so painful to just pick the right mic. It's several clicks. But yeah, so something well designed, people enjoy using more. Something or use at all, period, or don't they, something that is not well designed tends not to be used or tends to be uninstalled. So that's kind of like maybe like the high level of why user experience is important.
It's interesting. It brings me back to the early ages of going live, where all of a sudden Periscope and Meerkat came around, like these new apps. Yeah, you can go on Periscope and Meerkat and you can go live. And YouTube was like, but wait a minute, you can go live on YouTube already for such a long time. But getting through that, you had to go to a Hangout and then you had to figure out how to configure it. And then, of course, Facebook came and blew them all away because there were much more users. And on Facebook, it was just 2 clicks and you were done. And
Exactly.
it's interesting from that perspective, where we often think as innovation is like something creating something completely new, whereas sometimes it's just like you want something that's so simple to use that anybody can
Yeah.
use it. So yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And then to follow up the question, um, like do you see certain websites or certain ideas that are actually really good ideas, and then when it comes out it actually doesn't work because the UX is so terrible that people are like, even if it's a great solution to a problem, this just doesn't work for me.
I can't think of. Let me think about that for that problem. That the example, but a different. I thought you were going to ask a different type of question, but so like one thing thought that I had in mind was like, you know, you can, like, if we're talking startups and products, you can build a whole business on a feature that another company already has that is like so darn buried, right? Like you said here, that was a great
Yeah.
example. Like Calendly, Google Calendar actually has that feature. It's called Events, and it's like a totally different tab. But Calendly is like simplifies that to just a few clicks, right? And you just share your Calendly link, and that's your schedule. You know, versus Google Calendar, that one little feature is buried in some. You know, you have to, first of all, if you don't know it, you probably have to Google how to find that feature and how to turn that on and how to set those things. Whereas like with Calendly, it's just a few clicks. So yeah,
And
what?
that's also better integratable into your website, for instance,
Yeah,
Calendly.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, now to think, because now that you mention it, you can actually, yeah, it's really upsetting that Google always already had those features, but they keep burying those
And it's
features
harder
every
to
time.
use, so people will still, like, we still use Calendly even though that feature exists, because it's easier for someone to grab my Calendly link than, you know, sharing that other link and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, when you mentioned Google Events to me, I didn't even know of it. I looked it up, and I think they buried it even further now, that you have to have the Google Business subscription before you can actually use it. So yeah, and like, okay, never mind, sticking to Calendly. So
Exactly.
I've experienced that firsthand after you told me the first time.
Yeah.
But yeah, quickly sticking to the UI UX for a bit. Um, I was watching a few, YouTube videos a while back, and this thought came that Western, like as you said, the more modern Western world is very minimal. The designers are blowing things up, making it like focus on one thing, not enough information. But if you look at the eastern side, China, Japan, it's flooded with. I can now read a bit of Chinese and Japanese, but it's flooded with characters. It's flooded with text. There's very little white space. So I'm not sure. You work with Asian companies as well as US. What's the difference there? Do you think in philosophy, but also in experience in that UI
Mm.
UX, that the Asian markets go more for like flooding with you a lot of text, and the Western is more white space.
Yeah, it's very different design sensibilities. I can't claim too much experience with Chinese and Japanese design. I would say I have a very cursory knowledge, but I do understand that they prefer less clicks and more information up front, and they prefer them have more information density, whereas Western mindset or sensibilities prefer, you know, cleaner, more white space, cleaner design, you know, kind of simpler workflows. And that's why also, you know, like I think I would, not to generalize, but kind of maybe like Eastern Asian culture, you prefer less clicks, and you want information all in one page that they can just see and scan. Whereas Western or US design sense, it's more, one, it's more visual, one, it's more space, and two, kind of, they don't mind clicking more, right? Having more clicks to go through more pages. But as long as it's clean and sort of a narrow workflow. I think Thai is a little different because it's somewhere in between. Like Thai, speaking of having Thai customers in the past, they do like clean design. The Thai vocabulary and Thai words tend to do, kind of like maybe certain languages like German, like, a simple word in English, maybe translated to Thai, it's like several words. So the buttons are kind of like, you have that problem where it's more verbose. So, you run into those problems where, what would take, one or two words or would just blow up in Thai. But generally speaking, they also prefer cleaner sensibilities. I think more though, Thai consumers are at least kind of in e-commerce. The difference is like they're very sales driven and promo driven. So so you have these gaudy like on sale now, like all these in your face sales. So which for my Western sensibilities, it's not very clean, right? Because it's just like glaring and gaudy like sales buttons and graphics. Yeah.
Cool. There's a quick question here from Anil on the UX, and he asks, "How will UX change now that we have more conversational interactions with tech? So like Alexa, like voice activated. How does UX play a role in that, in moving more?"
Yeah, UX has expanded, right? I think in even throughout my career, right? In the beginning, UX was mostly thought about for web desktop. Now we think about UX a lot. Most of the UX we think about is still web desktop now plus mobile, or depending on which customer we're talking to, mobile might be more important. But sometimes there's also watch interfaces, and now UX has expanded, right? It might be voice interface. So UX designers now, there's more specializations. So there's more to learn. There's more to specialize, because the web desktop experience is different than the mobile experience. It's different than the tablet experience. It's different than the voice experience. So UX designers now also can or need to, for different companies, have to work on building voice interfaces as well, or like in-car interfaces even, or like large screen display interfaces or TV interfaces. So like, for example, like now, there's a lot of smart TVs. I think what's happened during COVID is my consumption of YouTube has changed. Now that I'm home, I spend a lot more time on TV, and like I would say a good chunk of my YouTube consumption is actually on TV now through a smart TV interface. So somebody had to design that, and that's different than a clickable web interface. So it's just more things.
You touched on a very interesting part as well, because we end up coming back to, well, YouTube is not really Google, but it still is. And YouTube had this terrible interface for making the cover photo for the YouTube channel work on a television. I was like, it didn't make any, the dimensions didn't make any sense. And but you touch upon something very interesting, and I want to follow up on that, because I think 20 years ago I had a discussion, 20 to 15 years ago I had a discussion with my dad, and we were discussing at the time, mobile phones were kind of still new, and I was having a discussion like, at a certain point the computer is going to do everything that the mobile phone does. And he was like, no, it's going to be the other way around. The mobile phone is going to do whatever the computer does. And of course he was right. At the time I was still young, I just had the thought in my head. And that's kind of the change, where of course we still use the desktop, and you just told us you went full circle and why. But all of a sudden, you see that things that you would usually do on bigger devices are going on phones, which you're seeing with, of course, young children who like just take the phone of their parents and they watch YouTube, and they're used to like a screen that is way too small for me. Like I'm not gonna watch on this screen when I have a big screen. For them, it's like, yeah, but I'm used to it. They don't even click away the ads. I'm like, yeah, the ad is disturbing me because they don't even click away the ads. They just watch through it. So then my question comes, and you're into that part as well, and the UX and UI as well. So I do want to, where do you feel we're going towards? Are we definitely going towards more the voice integrated systems? Are we going to more towards an Internet of Things that everything is connected in your living room? What kind of changes do you really see, like, and see like, okay, in 5 years time, people don't think about it yet, but this is going to be a pretty normal thing, which now is kind of a techie or a geeky thing.
Yeah. Well, being a techie and geeking out over stuff, I'm an enabler and of connecting. My company is an enabler of connecting things to the internet, and we worked on IoT related projects, and I also geek out on stuff. So I think we're just going to see more and more connected devices. One, because we're tethered to our mobile phones for better or for worse. In fact, funny story, today I actually just installed some water sensors. So they're sensors to detect water leaks, and of course I bought smart ones. They have like dumb ones that are just, if they sense it, they just blare alarm, from their stuff. But this one does that. And it's also IoT. So you did install an app and you connect the Bluetooth. But the idea is, if something like, hey, a washer dryer leaks, or, a pipe leaks and the floor gets wet, I'll get an alert from my phone, even if I'm not home. So that's I think people want that because of the convenience, right? You're not always going to be home and you want to be alerted. You want to be, I think somebody there was like a really funny video where, I recall this was like maybe a couple of years ago, where somebody had a Ring doorbell, right? And then there was a delivery package, and if they weren't home, what they did was, there was a Tesla parked in the driveway. What they did was they opened the Tesla for the delivery person to put the package in the car. So they remotely opened the door, unlock the Tesla, so that the delivery person can put the package in the Tesla, and then they could lock it. So they turned the Tesla into a smart locker, using like the combination of Ring to let the person know who it was, and then Tesla as a storage. Was very interesting and fascinating. But something like that wasn't possible many years before, right? Like the person could just, they ring the doorbell a couple of times, nobody's home, so I'm just going to leave the package here and risk the possibility of getting it stolen. I think people are willing to, it's not much of a trade, like, that, yeah, of course there's some privacy issues and stuff, but connecting things to the internet makes it more convenient. So I think more and more people want to do it. Even the lights in the back, I actually connect them to kind of smart, smart switches. So I'm just turning them on and off from my phone now. Yeah.
So now we do have to ask the question: where do you stand on the privacy? Like we've seen, like for instance, I still mock my friends because the beginning of the year, when WhatsApp kind of announced that they were changing the privacy settings, like everybody jumped onto other messaging platforms, and I was of course like, yeah, that's fine, but like we have we have 0.6 million population in Suriname, and we have over 1 million active mobile phones. So we have 1.5 active mobile phones per inhabitant. And considering we still have youngsters as well, so basically 2 or more phones per person, and everybody uses WhatsApp. So WhatsApp is kind of the main app that's being used here. And people were like, yeah, we're switching over, we're now going to use Signal. And then of course I'm kidding around 6 months later and saying like, so how's it going on Signal? Are you still using Signal? And it was, of course, for convenience sake. But there is, of course, the issue with data and how much data is being given. Now, from a marketing perspective, I, of course, love the data, the user data, because I can target better. But from a from more a community social perspective, it is kind of discomforting how much information you're giving away. So where do you see there's a boundary between what kind of information people are allowed to know from you and what they aren't allowed to know from you?
Yeah, I guess my stance on that is a very pragmatic, stance of a business owner, or an entrepreneur. And there's a saying, right? I don't know if you've heard of it. It's like, if you aren't paying for the product, you are the product. Like, how do you expect Facebook to
Yeah.
host all the photos you've ever uploaded, or all the videos that you ever uploaded, that you take, everybody, and all the private messages between all you and all your friends? Like, they have to operate a business. They're operating. There's real tangible costs of data centers and engineers and designers. Like, their whole, I can tell you, like they're just, maybe their iOS mobile design team is probably bigger than my whole company, right? Like, so those are real hard costs that they have to bear. So, like, how do they do that for free? They can't do this for free. It costs money. So they have to pay for, if you are not paying a member, like, hey, if you're paying for Proton email, or Salesforce CRM and stuff, you're paying for that, right? So there's an exchange in value somehow, right? Where you're giving money, so there's an expectation of privacy. Where here, I use this product absolutely for free. So, I look at it as, well, they have to make money somehow.
Wait, you have to pay for Proton
Well,
Mail?
I don't know. I'm just throwing out some sort of
Oh, okay.
some,
No, no,
like,
no.
I
Because
don't
I
know
was
what,
getting
like,
worried. Yeah.
yeah.
No,
I'm
I was
confused.
getting worried now that I
Or
might see a
something
bill
else. Yeah,
someday.
like,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Wait,
No,
did
but
you
a more
switch to
secure.
Proton?
I don't use
I
any. I mean, I use G Suite, so I already pay for my G Suite Enterprise. That's plenty.
Cool.
yeah, no,
Uh,
no, Diego. I do use Proton Mail, but
Yeah.
it's for things
I've
that I
heard of
don't
it.
want.
I've seen it around, but I haven't really delved into it. But yeah,
Yeah.
I'm pretty much the same as it. It's got to be practical, and there's a trade off always, and you got to decide for yourself which trade off you want, uh, and then go down that path. So I want to tie this up real quick, full circle, with basically a final question, a final big question, and this is more directed or enabled by you, Shanluk, as your company culture is this way. But as COVID has, forced a lot of people to work remotely and working from a distance, deciding your own times, deliver. Um, I've noticed from your website and the background you've done, you guys serve clients internationally. You guys or a kind of like a global team or a spread out team, remote first. Your team is like, correct me if I'm wrong, like mostly remote working. So did you start from the start since 2012, 2011 when you started Impekable? What was that the philosophy, start remote first before all this COVID that shifted all the companies to think that way?
Yeah, we were always, well, we started out as hybrid, where so I get a lot of my influence from a company called a Chicago startup called 37 Signals. If you're kind of in the startup space, you might know a project management tool called Basecamp. So anyways, they're one of the, they have an office in Chicago, but they are also a very remote culture, and they've always kind of been very vocal about hiring remote. When I started Impekable in the Bay Area, we always hired some people remote, and then there was also some people in the Bay Area. And for the people in the Bay Area, we had an office that we went to. Why we hired remote? Well, one, financially, it just was more feasible, because in the Bay Area, I'm competing with like Google and Facebook and stuff. I can't compete on salary like that. It's just not realistic. So we were forced to hire remote just to be able to get the talent from anywhere. so we were remote first from the very beginning. Some people were local, but I would say at any point in time, 75 or 80% of our team was always remote. So yeah, so it's always been remote. So we've when COVID happened, the thing that did change was mostly for me is we shut down our office, and I stopped going to an office. So we went from 80% remote to now 100% remote. Yeah.
So
How
how
difficult
was
was
that?
that? How difficult was it to shut down the office?
Yeah.
Well, when COVID happened, you couldn't go, right? Everything was locked down and you couldn't go to the office. So we were spending money for an office we weren't using anyways for like 3 months. And then I decided, okay, this is just wasting money. So we're able to get out of it. But I think psychologically or emotionally, I was one of the people who probably had the most difficult time shifting a little bit because I always had an office. I went to an office. I got up in the morning,
Yeah.
got dressed for work, drove to work, had a parking lot, and then walked from the parking lot to an office. Whereas 80% of my team, they just got up and worked at their computer. So for me, it was the biggest adjustment of like work. I guess maybe like work-life boundary, because I had a very clear delineation, right? I went to an office. And then also I was also like the traveling work. The nature of work for me changed because as the CEO / salesperson of the company, so like for the local Bay Area, San Francisco clients, it was not unusual for me to drive and go see them. For other clients, obviously I didn't, that weren't in the Bay Area, obviously I didn't go see them. But I was used to also commuting, going see clients. So that completely changed. And we had to change how we, attracted new clients or new business. And like, I think the companies that had an advantage, just like the companies that did remote before COVID were already used to it. The companies that were already great at online marketing, digital marketing, I think did really well in COVID because they were already doing it. For me, I was relying a lot on personal relationships. Like to me, like if people, Diego, you were like impressed by the logos. I guess my superpower is I'm great at developing relationships and having face-to-face relationships. I would drive and see people. I'm good at that, and thinking of them and having coffee with them. So like all that was just blown away, and I had to rethink on how I create new business. I feel like, in some ways my legs were cut off, like at the knees. So like I was handicapped because, how I was overly relying on offline channels and face-to-face contact and personal relationships. Whereas companies that were digital native and digital online marketing, now they had the advantage. And then, I had wished that, man, I wish I'd started learning these skills and doing these things sooner, because now the world's kind of changed.
So a quick follow-up on it. So from a UX perspective, your team was basically already on board on that. So in the early days, how did you kind of, from a employee user experience side, how did they, what's the feedback you got from them? And was that kind of, you drew inspiration from others, but finding these people, were they already, thinking in that same direction on remote first? And how did you even find these remote employees? What's the feedback you got?
Well, I think as we, because we were able to attract great customers, I think it wasn't hard for us to attract talent. What I think people really enjoy, we attracted the people who really enjoyed, a sense of work-life balance that enabled them to work remotely, or they wanted to work remotely. So we've always attracted kind of the remote first work, remote first workers. What I think what's changed now is every company is remote first, not by choice. How the user experience for us, we always had to be remote from the very beginning, remote friendly from the very beginning. So the user experience had always been video. So like even when we had a meeting in the office, we would want to join, even if everybody was here. We always create a Zoom meeting. We always create a Google Hangout meeting so people could join. We use the Google tools very diligently so that people who were remote could feel inclusive. Stand-ups, we record them, so if you're in another time zone, you could watch our all hands stand up later. So we designed a culture of remote first. We do a lot of documentation. We write things down a lot. We use Confluence as our wiki, Google Docs, Google Slides to present, and those are always made available to the team. So even if we made it so that in as much as possible people felt included if you're a remote worker. And then pre-COVID, what we did was twice a year we would have a get together. So we do value face-to-face relationships, especially being who I am. That's what I value. So at some point we started a tradition of in the summer we kind of take sort of a break for the week and we fly everybody in for the week and we hang out. We do a lot of team building. We do a lot of eating together, having lots of meals together and fun activities. So we try to do that. We tried to do that pre-pandemic twice a year, summer and winter.
That's really cool. Is there anyone on your team that you haven't met personally face to face yet?
Oh, now there's a lot because we've also grown. So we've since hired many people since the pandemic. So I haven't met many of those people. Pre-pandemic, if we hired someone new, one of the things I did was they would spend a week at the Bay Area headquarters. Now we have no headquarters, so I don't know what we do now post-pandemic, but that was one thing that they got to spend time at the office, and we put them in a 1 week Airbnb, and typically we the people in the office, we take turns taking them out to lunch. I sometimes take them out to dinner. Spend as much time with them as possible, and to develop those face-to-face, real life relationships and build those bonds. I don't have a good answer on how to replicate that during a pandemic. Of course, everybody has to be locked down, but I think now that things are opening up and people are starting to get vaccinated in US, we can kind of get back to a little bit of that where, hey, we can maybe spend some money to fly people in, but I'm not, with everybody being remote, there's no central place to fly now. Maybe that's even better.
You can pick one out. You can say, hey, let's go there because everybody wants to go. But yeah, so the question is then, how do you find these people? Like how does the selection process to work at an Impekable look like?
Yeah, we have a recruiter. We put out job postings. That's like one of the first thing is the hiring manager writes a job description of the role that they need filled. And then our recruiter will put it out there in various job boards, and they'll kind of be the first gate, if you will, to filter out. And it's actually, she deals with a lot. She'll get there might by the time that people start interviewing. So I remember one stat where our team interviewed 6 people. Well, she narrowed it down from 60. She had 60 good candidates that, and the funnel, the top of funnel is even bigger, but then she narrowed it down to 6 from the 60. From that, maybe 60 was okay. And then from there, she whittled it down to 6 so that we don't have to deal with the 60. And and then we have a process, an interview process, like at least 3 gates of interviews, where whoever's hiring will interview, and then finally at some point I may get to talk to them. But companies, at a size where I don't really even, by the time it gets to me, most people, they just want my approval. But we also reach out to our network. We're encouraged to, if you know someone good from our team, this is an opportunity to work at Impekable. One great thing that we've adopted from other hiring practices is screening for culture and our culture values. So that's not something that we did before in the early days. I was nobody ever taught me how to hire, but having brought on people from more who have more experience hiring, we've adopted some really good hiring practices. So that's something that we do now, is we have questionnaires that also screen for culture fit and stuff like that.
That's really, really elaborate, I'd say, and the rate that you've grown as well, even during COVID. But yeah, there's actually so much more I want to follow up on, but we've hit the hour mark, and I think it's time we wind it down. So to close it off, I'm gonna leave it at that. Jean-Luc, did you have anything else burning that you wanted to ask?
I mean, I'm gonna leave Gregory up with another rough question, if I might say so. As tech has become more integrated and powerful, is there a place for government regulation to get involved, or will it ruin the purity of the art?
Thanks, Gregory. Well, I mean, tech is a tool. It's not an art, right? I think art, when people, this is the same analogy, like what design in my sense solves a problem. UX design is not art. Art is, if a UX designer has too big an ego and it's about their design and their work, they don't have a place at Impekable. Design has to solve a problem for the users, has to solve a problem for the stakeholders, the business that's hiring us. And it's not really about the design as created by the designer. There's no place for design, like the ego of the designer. In that sense, tech is similar, where tech needs to solve a problem. And if tech is being a tool that's taking advantage of people in a gray way, that I just read something interesting now. That's a headline that caught my attention. I think a firm bought like an old power plant in New York, upstate New York, and this was in recent news, and they're using that power plant to just mine Bitcoin, and that is creating so much heat that it's heating up one of the lakes. Right, that's actually that has a negative impact on the environment. To me, it's sort of like the equivalent of dumping waste into a lake, right? You're destroying the ecosystem of the lake by doing that. So I think there should be some regulatory thing, or like maybe you tax that, right? Like there's like a carbon tax because there's carbon emissions. You have to tax that. So I think there's, and just like monopolies, right? Like I think now there are monopolies, but it's not clear to the government that they are monopolies. Like before, like those telcos in the US that were broken up, like Baby Bell telcos, because it was obvious that it wasn't a monopoly. Now like Google's so big that it's essentially a monopoly, right? Facebook is a monopoly, because they control WhatsApp, Instagram, Facebook, like all the major social networks, right? Like it's still all Facebook. Like Google tracks you even if you have an iPhone, because you have some Google app, right? If you don't have Google Maps, you have Gmail. If you have Gmail, they're tracking your location, whether you like it or not, right? So if you don't want Google to track you, don't have any Google apps on it. And even then, if you don't have any Google apps, like maybe you have a consumer app that uses Google Ads, as their advertisement platform. So they'll track you anyways. So, so they essentially have a monopoly on tracking you. Yeah, I think
Yeah, can't escape Big Brother.
can't escape, big co. So I think at some
And
point,
we're thankful for them, because when you drive somewhere and you want to check the traffic, then they also use that
well, you trade
to
that,
find
right?
out
You
how
trade
busy
that
certain
It's a
streets are.
trade
convenience.
off.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. You trade that because you're not paying for anything, right? So most people are not paying for, like, I there's no way for me to pay for Google Maps. It's like I'd rather, some people would like, hey, don't track me, I'll pay for it. You can't, right? They want to track you, and they'll monetize in other ways.
Yeah, there's no opt out or opt
There's
in
no
option.
opt out, right? There's no like option to like, hey, let me pay you and don't track me.
Yeah.
So those companies, that is their business, is the dealing of data. So it's, yeah, at some point, it's when it becomes too invasive, I think, yeah, I guess the government should do something about it when it's too, yeah, that's beyond the point of this could go on and forever.
Yeah.
This
No,
get
I
more
think we'll
people
keep it
involved
at
to
that.
talk but
There's
this is a really good that was a
there's
really
so
good
much. Yeah,
question.
there's so much. Actually, it opened more floodgates, but
Yeah.
we'll probably have to do a follow up somewhere in the future. I'm not sure, but hope you're satisfied with that answer, Greg. Then I guess time to close off. Could you quickly tell us about the two podcasts you have, where people can find them and learn more about that, and then we'll round it
Sure.
up.
Yeah, one podcast is a UX design podcast called What is UX, and you can go to whatisux.co. And I interview designers, example like it's designers from Netflix, YouTube, Yelp. So those are great conversations to learn more about UX design. And the other one is a founders podcast where I interview startup founders, and that is it's called Founders with Pek. You can find it on YouTube, is the primary format, but you can also find it on popular podcasts for the audio version. On Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and that stuff. The UX podcast is mostly an audio podcast. There's no YouTube version of that. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. We'll link those in the description as well once we release this episode. Guys, check out Impekable as well. They do amazing work.
Oh, thank you.
Pek, appreciated you coming on here with us and just sharing your perspective. I think we've definitely learned actually a lot from the different, from coming from Thailand and the different Asian perspective, but also the work culture that you've cultivated over the years. So appreciate that you sharing that with us. With that being said, guys, in the comments, thanks for showing up. Thanks for the questions, especially Greg. And yeah, look out for next week and the release of the audio version on the website and all podcasting platforms. Jean-Luc, I guess you have a final word and then you can roll us out.
As always, get back to us next Tuesday at 9 o'clock Surinamese time, 8 p.m. Eastern time. This was Social Confoes. See you back next week. Bye-bye.